You've been climbing for 2 hours. You finally made it to the top, and the boats are already gone. This is South Coast Heck. But here's what almost no one talks about. You had 2 hours and 40 minutes. The same 2 hours and 40 minutes as every single person on this ship. So what happened inside those hours and inside those corridors is one of the most contested questions in maritime history. To answer it, we go back 36 hours, to a dock in Queenstown, to a bag that holds everything you own, and to a promise you made to someone who told you he can't swim. Queenstown, Ireland, April 11th, 1912. The ship is so large it kind of doesn't make sense at first. You've seen ships before. This is something else. Something that takes up the whole horizon and keeps going past it. Your bag is on your shoulder. Papers, money, ticket, the proof that you have a plan. America is $46 and a canvas bag away, and you've been telling yourself that for months. Your companion is right beside you, your cousin, the closest thing to family on this crossing. At the gangway, you made him a quiet promise. We stay together. I get you there. He nodded. He can't swim. You can. That's why you said it. Marge is on the dock. She grabs your arm before you go up and says something you half hear over the crowd, in the horn, in the enormous, impossible fact of the ship. The big ships don't know your name. Find the people who do. You smile. You go up. You don't think about it again. But here's what you don't know yet. That warning is not superstition. It is the most structurally accurate thing anyone will say that night. You just don't have the evidence for it yet. Your berth is on F deck, forward, below the waterline. You've been aboard 4 days. You know your corridor, your staircase, your section of deck. The rest of the ship is kind of somewhere up there. Above you, around you, mapped in a language no one gave you. No one explained the route to the boat deck. You haven't needed one. But in roughly 2 hours and 40 minutes, in the dark, with the water moving, you will need to find the top of this ship without one. And the way up is not marked for you. Sunday night, April 14th. You're asleep by 10. At about 15 minutes to midnight, something happens. Later, Olaus Abelseth, a Norwegian farmer traveling third class with his own cousin and brother-in-law, described it simply. He woke, dressed, went up on deck. There was quite a lot of ice on the starboard side. He asked an officer directly, "Is there any danger?" The officer said, "No." Abelseth was not satisfied, but he went back below. You are not satisfied either, but the officer said no, and the ship is enormous and seems to know what it's doing, and your companion is still in his bunk, and you told him you'd keep him close. That is the first thing the system does to you, quietly, in the middle of the night, with authority. It answers your question, and the answer is wrong. 20 minutes pass, maybe 30. Then the water finds the floor of your cabin. It isn't much at first, a dampness, a shine on the painted metal that wasn't there before. Your bunkmates say go back to sleep. But the floor is wet, and the ship is still, and a ship moving is a different thing from a ship that is stopped. You grab the bag. You tell your companion to get up. Now! Steward John Hart, working the forward third-class section that night, testified before the British Board of Trade inquiry. A large number of men coming from the forward part of the ship with their baggage, those that were berthed up forward, single men, that is you. Bag in hand, companion beside you, moving aft through the long corridor on E-deck. Scotland Road, the crew called it. A passage that ran almost the full length of the ship along the port side. Single bare bulbs overhead. Metal walls. The sound of footsteps from men you don't know. All moving the same direction. The corridor is kind of endless, kind of tilted in a way you can't quite measure yet. And somewhere behind you, beginning around 12:30 in the morning, the water has found Scotland Road. It is not running, it is just rising, the way the whole night has been rising since the moment the officer told you there was no danger. The bag is heavy, you haven't put it down, everything you own is in your hands, and the corridor is still going, and the question you can't stop asking, the one that has been open since Queenstown, is when. When do you have to choose between the bag and the climb? Around 12:30, word passed through the third-class quarters. Women and children to the boat deck. Hart received instructions and began escorting groups upward. He would make at least 2 trips. But for the single men berthed forward, there was no steward coming. There were gates and doors between third class and the decks above, and what happened at those gates is one of the most disputed questions in the historical record. 3 men testified at 2 separate inquiries. One described a gate locked and then broken down. Another testified all gates were already standing open by 12:30. A third said the barriers in his section were signs only, the doors simply open. 3 witnesses, 3 sections of a very large ship, 3 completely different experiences, and the inquiry could not reconcile them. Neither will we. What the record does confirm is this: the experience in that corridor was confusion, obstruction, a crowd of men who did not know which way was clear, and somewhere in that crowd, you've lost your companion. You're climbing now. The staircase is steep, and the people ahead are pushing, and the bag is in your hand, and the bag is kind of everything at once. The papers, the money, the $46 plan, every person back home who believed you were right to go, and you set it down. Somewhere on the stairs, at a point you won't be able to name later, you set it on a step and keep climbing. You do not go back. That is exactly the correct choice, and it costs everything you came here to build. You reached the boat deck at approximately 1:55 in the morning, historically attested. A group of third-class passengers arrived there just as the last lifeboat was launched. They looked confused as they gazed at the empty davits. The ropes are just kind of hanging there, iron arms reaching over black water, nothing attached, trailing loose into the dock. You can see a lantern out on the Atlantic, small and moving. That is the last boat. It is already pulling away. And then you see your companion. He found his way up. A different staircase, a different gate, a different piece of luck in the crowd. He is standing 15 feet from you at the railing. He is alive. You kept the promise. You both got here. The davits are empty. Abelseth described this moment with a plainness that is almost unbearable. He said, "I was standing there, and I asked my brother-in-law if he could swim, and he said no. I asked my cousin if he could swim, and he said no. So we could see the water coming up, the bow of the ship was going down, and there was kind of an explosion. We could hear the popping and cracking, and the deck raised up and got so steep that the people could not stand on their feet. His brother-in-law said they had better jump, or the suction would take them. Abelseth said, 'No, we won't jump yet. We ain't got much show anyhow, so we might as well stay as long as we can.' The water came up. At 2:20 in the morning, on April 15th, 1912, the Titanic went under. Abelseth survived. 20 minutes in the water before he reached a waterlogged collapsible on the edge of sinking itself. His cousin and his brother-in-law were not there. Of the 462 third-class men aboard, 75 survived, roughly 1 in 6. First-class women, more than 97%. This was not fortune. This was structure. The evacuation system processing passengers in the sequence it was built for, running its class order at full institutional speed in an emergency it was never designed to handle. By the time it reached single men and forward steerage, the boats were gone. The inquiries called almost none of them to testify. The record that survived is the record they were allowed to leave. You're back at the railing. The ropes hang loose from iron arms over black water, and you remember what Marge said at the dock. Warm, slightly odd, easy to dismiss over the noise of the crowd and the horn and the enormous, impossible fact of the ship. The big ships don't know your name. Find the people who do. She was not speaking in metaphor. She was describing a mechanism. The ship didn't know your name. The evacuation system had no procedure for finding you in it. The inquiry barely kept you. The warning was not superstition. It was structural truth, spoken by someone who understood, without the vocabulary to say it plainly, that large systems do not individuate. The system worked exactly as designed. It just wasn't designed for you. How many names did the ship not know?